then I started working on, human longevity and making some pretty big strides. And at the time, to look at the carbon 60 thing, it had been discovered by three guys in 1985, and they all got a Nobel Prize for it. And one of the fellows is a friend of mine, and really genuinely great chemist. And they made real strides with it, but people thought that it was going to be, because it's structured in the way it is, that it'd be used for maybe drug delivery in people or something like that. Nobody really thought that it was going to be something that was a product where people would actually ingest it. But then a research group started lipolysing it, just combining it with lipids, and that allows it to move into the cell membrane, because otherwise it's hydrophobic, so you can't get it to bond to water. And once you lipolyze it, you can actually ingest it and it'll move through a cell membrane. So a research group headed up by this fellow Fatih Musa was doing this experiment to figure out the LD50, which is the lethal dosing, like how much of a substance kills 50% of the population of the animals, and try and and that's a standard practice to just assess how toxic is something.
Yeah.
And so in this case, what they found was, rather than kill the animals, it extended their lifespan 90%. And I saw that study when it came out.
Even though they went over the threshold,
Yeah,
so
actually,
it didn't have any negative effect. You
no.
could keep going
Yeah.
over that like effect, and
Yeah. Now, the one caveat, and this is because I've done clinical trials at this point, years of study on that, is you can tox out the system a little bit just by the lipid load, right? So your liver and your kidney, I mean, you're only going to be able to process out so much fatty acid combinations, right?
wouldn't you
So,
then like have
or so
disaster
many.
pants or something if you?
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
depending on the type, right? If you
yeah,
do it on, say, an MCT base or caprylic acid or capric acid or something like that, yeah, you're going to have some serious issues very rapidly. Like, kind of the threshold is about it for most people, unless they do a lot of MCT, or like they're bulletproof coffee junkies like myself. They,
yeah,
you know, you're probably going to have like 1 tablespoon is like your threshold, and beyond that point, bye bye.
yeah.
Yeah, but so you don't want to do too many lipids, but in terms of the actual C60 that's been lipolysed, yeah, they didn't find a toxic threshold. They found exactly the opposite, that it actually benefited them, and they got this 90% extension in lifespan. And I saw the research and thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So I got some P53 knockout mice, which are the P53 gene is your tumor suppressor gene. So with a P53 knockout, they've extracted the tumor suppressor gene, and then the mice are born without that. The progeny of the ones where they've extracted it. And so I took those mice and I did the whole cohort, and I put them on carbon 60. And the reason I used those is because I was looking for anti-inflammatory responses, and they have a very defined mortality curve, because they're that's what everybody uses for cancer research, right? So if you're an
Oh,
oncology person, you're doing research with P53 knockouts. It's just the industry standard. So there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of these poor little critters that have been sacrificed for the greater good of science.
so
Unless you ask them, and I'm sure they'd be like, yeah, whatever,
yeah.
not the greater good.
So the P53 knockout mice, everyone knows like they only live for like this. It's like kind of like textbook. They live for a year or whatever it is.
Yeah,
It's
you've got
pretty
wild
dialed in.
type, homozygous, and heterozygous, and very defined mortality curves for each of those three. And so I got the ones with the shortest lifespan I could, so I could actually quantify it and say, okay, what's going on here? What's the inflammatory response like? Because what I was looking for was ways to decrease systemic inflammatory responses. And also, I knew that there'd be a correlate with longevity. But I didn't think there would be as much. I thought that most likely the study that they did in France was probably a bit anomalous. But then at the end of the experiment, my mice lived 93% longer on average. And I thought, okay, so a 3% variance between what's going on there and what I did in my lab, that's obviously not a coincidence. I mean, that's some strange statistical anomaly, just like randomly, it's just 3% apart. So obviously there was something there. So I kept working on it, and I thought, okay, this is a good thing. So then I started looking at the other effects. And P53s, they idiopathically develop tumors, right? So they
Yeah.
have spontaneous tumor formation. Well, mine didn't, and that was one of the things that was very, very curious. And actually,
Wow.
interestingly, a study just came out where they did the same sort of experiment, but they found that it was creating tumors, which is very peculiar, because the guys in France and myself didn't see any tumor formation, and I've used it on animals with cancer in the lab since then, and I know that it hasn't created tumor formation. So with that specific thing, because I'm sure somebody will ask about it, my guess is that it's very easy to have an experiment like that go awry because there's a definitive degradation and an oxidation of the lipids if you expose it to light, because C60 is very photoreactive. It's very, very
Oh,
photoreactive.
interesting.
So yeah, actually, that's why all the bottles are dark on the stuff I make and that kind of thing, because you have to keep them, in the dark. So, yeah, so 93% extension of lifespan, no discernible tumors, which kind of led me to item 2 on my list, which was cancer, because I wanted to see if I could make a dent in cancer. And lo and behold, there was a thing there. So I took it a little farther and then actually made a special compound that was a lipofullerene saccharide conjugate, which is just the fancy way of saying fat, sugar, and carbon 60.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. But lipofullerene sounds so much better.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. Yeah, it's there's the fancy way of saying
Yeah.
it, and then there's the
Fat and sugar.
normal.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I try and explain things. I was explaining some of this stuff to my dad one time, and he called me out and he was like, "Dude, stop with the quarter words. Like, if you can't explain it in plain English, then you don't really understand it, and you're not as sharp as you think you are. So why don't you try again?"
And your dad is a smart guy. Yeah.
Yes, my
As a-
dad is like a super freak genius. Yeah, he's like literally probably one of the smartest guys in the world. He's got that, super almost 200 IQ kind of thing going on,
my
which
God.
is frighteningly daunting when you're a little kid, right? Because that's just the norm. You don't know any different. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I remember trying to read his master's thesis when I was a kid, and I had to get a thesaurus to go through the first paragraph, like quite literally, which which definitely puts things in perspective when you're a kid. You're like, oh, okay, so that's where the bar's at. Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
so-
what I have to live into. Live
yeah,
up to.
that's
Jesus.
that's exactly it, right? So
Yeah.
like, wow, those shoes seem kind of large. So yeah, so you start pushing yourself. Anyway, so with the C60 thing, that's kind of where that came from, is doing the research in that and just seeing what sort of things you could do with that and the different biological responses you could elicit. And it was crazy, right? So drops in cytokines, inflammatory responses, they would all just, in 2 hours, cytokine responses would drop.
Wow.
And so that's, yeah, I did that for quite a few years, filed a bunch of different patents, released a bunch of different products, and then really stopped working full time on that last year and